Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today I want to talk to you about rhythmic modulation. What is it and why do you need it in your life? Well, rhythmic modulation is nothing more than taking a static sound like this and we modulate this sound, that means we just change its timbre, in a way that's more rhythmical, until we get something, for example, like this. So that way, when you add some drums, this element will add to the rhythm instead of slowing down the energy like static pads often can do. So if we add the drums here, for example, we get this. I'm working here on a project for Face the Sun together with my partner Anton, so go give us a follow on SoundCloud if you like this. Anyway, let's get into Ableton and let me show you how to achieve rhythmic modulation. Alright, so let's break this down. Modulation is nothing more than changing a parameter of a sound over time, right? And in electronic music, there are a few modulation sources that you might be familiar with, like, for example, an envelope or an LFO. If you don't know what those things are, go check out my synthesis tutorials here, 1 and 2. But especially in the world of analog synthesizers, there's a tool called a sequencer that is very often used to inject rhythmical stepped movements into a sound's timbre. Like, for example, in a step sequencer, what you might do is you might have 16 knobs that indicate 16 16th notes, right? And the sequence runs through them all the time. And for each knob, you set a different setting for the filter cutoff. This way, you can just hold down a note on your synthesizer, and instead of relying on the notes of the synthesizer to generate the interest, instead it's the timbre of the sound that generates the interest by having the filter open and close in a rhythmical fashion. This is a concept that runs especially deep in modular synthesis, like in Eurorack, and in some DAWs, like for example in Reason, it's very, very simple to achieve this. But first I want to show you how to do this natively in Ableton so that you understand the concept without any external tools. So like in the example, we've got this very basic sound. Okay, and except for that first hit, there is not a lot of envelopes or LFOs in this sound. It's very static, right? So we have to inject, or we want to inject for this example, some movement into it. And the tools that we're going to use are, for example, let's use a filter for the start of this. So let's go to Auto Filter. And we're just going to remove the brightness, right? And what we want now is that this opens up in an interesting way. And you can, of course, do that with an LFO here, by doing it like this, for example. But that feels like an LFO. That you have to set it to an exact amount, and then it's always going to be rhythmically the same. So instead of this kind of LFO, what we're going to do is we're going to use Ableton's shaper device. Now, the shaper device is this kind of holdover from Max for Live. I would secretly prefer if they made it more native to Ableton, and I think it's only in the suite, by the way. I don't think it's in the other versions. But what it is it's like a complex LFO. It's an LFO where you can draw in your own shape. So if you change the shape here, you can see it changes here. And right now it's going every quarter note. But instead of using it as an LFO, what we can do is we can set the rate to 1 bar, for example, set the grid size to 16. And now what we've got is kind of like a step sequencer, a 1-bar step sequencer. Obviously you can go longer or shorter, you can adapt this to what you need, but imagine we remove the curve and we simply draw in something like this. Let's go like this. Let me do a pattern of 3/16 notes, just like in my dotted bassline video. If you checked out that video, you will know that 3/16 notes always leads to something cool. And so now the shaper has to modulate something. So let's set this by hitting map to the frequency amount. And you see it jumping up and down there. Now let's see what this sounds like. There we go. And of course we can now change the offset, change the depth amount, So we can mess around with what the sweet spot is for this. But we've just created a little bit of movement in this sound where otherwise there was no movement at all. And we don't just have to do this with the filter, we can do this with more extreme plugins as well. So for example, here is Soundtoy's Decapitator, right? Which makes the sound really gritty. And let's change the tone. All right, so let's go here, let's unmap this and let's map it. Cool. That's a weird ass sound. I didn't know what this was going to sound like. Interesting. So in this case, I didn't really like how it sounded on the Decapitator, and instead I went back to the filter and I set it to a more extreme setting so that we only hear. It's almost like playing notes or almost like a gating kind of a thing where we're only hearing this. I think that's cool. I think that's cool. So now I've got this really rhythmic sound. And on top of that, let's now use a delay with the same system. So for example, we go to Audio Effects and we come up here to Delay and we put a delay in there. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to rhythmically modulate the delay as well. And so I need to mess around a little bit to find a sweet spot. And so give me a moment and I'll show you the result once I've found a kind of a sweet spot. Here we go. So now we've got some rhythm thanks to this filter that's moving up and down, and the dry wet of this delay is now also being cut in and out to create kind of ghost notes in this rhythm. So we've got an auto filter and a delay, each with their own shaper next to it, to create rhythmic modulation. And so let's remind ourselves, if we select all of these, what the sound was before. Really static, and with it, a completely different sound, right? Much more rhythmical. And let's add in some drums and see what that sounds like. Cool. We're gonna need some volume on this thing. So. Nice. Even more volume. Cutting out some of the lows. Not bad, not bad. And so there we go. Rhythmic modulation, ladies and gentlemen. We have turned this static sound into cool. There's a lot more nuance and subtlety to this sound than to the previous one. And especially when your music revolves around drums and rhythm, like in a lot of dance music, having a static pad can sometimes lower the energy and make things more mellow when that's not necessarily what you want. And therefore having short staccato kind of sounds adds to the excitement and the rhythm of your music. I want to show you real quickly why Reason is also really good at this, because in the Reason ecosystem, they've used some of the philosophy of modular synthesis, where you can connect wires behind every unit. So let's take something like the pulverizer, which is a distortion unit, but that also has a low-pass filter in it. And let's do a similar exercise where we take a modulation source, like the equivalent of the shaper here would probably be inside of the utilities, the matrix pattern sequencer. There might be even better ways, but I'm still an old school Reason user and I know this machine quite well. So if you look on the back of the matrix, right, you can connect the curve CV to the filter frequency. And then on the front, you can, instead of the keys setting, you can go to the curve setting. And here you can draw in a curve like whatever you want. So I could, for example, mute this and do clusters of 3/16 notes, just like in the dotted basslines video. See that? So this is now opening up this filter at this exact tempo. And I can now use many of the other settings here. Now, for example, any of these other things, like this tone, for example, I could modulate it with the gate CV. So I don't know what I'll do, but I'll leave it like this. take the gate CV, set it to what? To dirt maybe. Oh, look at this. We're adding secondary rhythms or patterns over this sound by maximizing the dirt. So you see how inside of Reason, this is very natively implemented, like this ability to do rhythmic modulation, whereas actually in Ableton, I feel like it's still a little bit hacky. I feel like the shaper device is maybe not as reliable as I would want it to be, but it does basically work. I am a Reason ambassador, by the way, so if you decide to check it out, you can always get a subscription with a discount using the affiliate link below. If you want to see what happens when you take rhythmic modulation to its extreme, check out this video on getting dirty with textures. There I go very far deep into this concept as well. If you feel like tutorials and tips like this are cool and all, but kind of random, and you don't really know how to learn electronic music in a more systematic way, well, I've made a Foundations of Electronic Music course on my website where I take you from absolutely zero prior knowledge of electronic music production up to about intermediate level producer, to the point where anything that I explained today shouldn't be a mystery for you. So do check out that course if you are looking for a more music education rather than just random tutorials. If you do use this technique, come show us on the Discord channel what you did with this. Follow my projects Face the Sun and Torque on SoundCloud. And until next time, stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye-bye.